in our organization, we've been doing some work on source protection and whistleblowers. And you will hear a little bit from Mulia from Indonesia about the joint Indonesia Leaks project that we started. But we have an esteemed panel here of specialists and experts. Most prominently, Yasmine Motarjemi, who is a corporate whistleblower and a food safety expert, who will tell us about her experiences on the disclosure of information and how that is not always as productive as one would hope. We have Teresa Ronderos, who is an investigative journalist famous for the Miroslava Breach investigation into the murder of Miroslava Breach in Mexico. We have Mulia, as I mentioned, the director of PPMN, the media development organization in Indonesia, who will speak to us about government interference, which does not lead to source protection. And we have Anna Myers, the executive director and founder of the Whistleblower International Network. We'll get to that first, but let me start with Eduardo Bertoni, professor of law in Buenos Aires, and he was commissioned by UNESCO to write a paper about whistleblowing and source protection. Eduardo, before we dig into the content, how did it come about that UNESCO wanted to ask you to write something about that? What is the interest of UNESCO? And is the paper something that is like the final stage of UNESCO, or is it the beginning of a conversation?
Okay, well, thank you, Leon. Thank you for help us to organize this excellent panel. I will speak in English just because my notes are in English and many of the people in the audience are English speaking. Pero puedo decir buenos días, buenas tardes o buenas noches. Gracias por acompañarnos. I cannot talk on behalf of UNESCO. I'm not a UNESCO official. UNESCO just asked me to write a paper on the relationship between whistleblowers and the press. However, when I was in conversation with UNESCO officials, my experience is that UNESCO realizes that this is an issue, this is a theme that deserves some sort of attention. I mean, the relationship between whistleblowers and the press. And that is the reason why I'm thinking that this is a starting point and this is not the end of the work.
So it's important to have a debate of today and whatever comes out in terms of recommendations, which what we are hoping for from all the panelists and those who want to participate in the audience will find its way to UNESCO to start the conversation rather than end the conversation.
I totally agree.
In your mind, what is the most important reason why sources are relevant for public interest?
Well, Leon, thank you. And if I may, we don't have much time. I mean, the paper is already published, is at the UNESCO library, so everyone can read the paper. But I would say that it's a good idea to start in a very brief, way to say what are the key findings that I included in the paper. And if you allow me, I want to, for the sake of the time that we have, I prefer not to, improvise, but to read. The key findings, the first thing is that human rights violations, corruption, or other illegal practice, we learn about these problems in many situations, thanks to people who bravely denounce them publicly or share information with brave investigative journalists who promise to protect their identity. So the activity of whistleblowers is not always linked with journalists, but in many cases it is linked with journalists. The second finding is that the relationship between journalists and whistleblowers has been generally, and I want to underscore generally, benefiting for both. And I underscore generally because in my investigation, I found that in some situations, the relationship between whistleblowers and journalists is very complicated. We can explore on that. We have people in our panel that can talk more about that.
Yeah.
The third finding is that whistleblowers must, and also the journalists must have guarantees, so that their expressions do not lead to consequences such as financial sanctions, job dismissal, undermining their family members or circle of friends, or threats or of arbitrary arrest. It is important the other finding that in some situations, whistleblowers approach journalists, but requires the protection of their identity. And for that reason, and for that to happen, journalists need to respect the professional ethic of confidentiality. Ideally, there should also be appropriate regulations so that journalists are not subject to legal sanctions for refusing to reveal their sources. This is another cluster that we need to work with, which is the protection and to increase the protection of sources of journalism. And the other and the last finding is that blowing the whistle should be understood as an exercise of the right to freedom of expression and should not only be seen as an instrumental tool to fight corruption or expose human rights violations. So it's part of freedom of expression. So all the efforts that we are doing to respect freedom of expression are also applicable to whistleblowers. For example, anti-SLAPP legislation. For example, using technology to protect the sources of whistleblowers. So those are the key findings. I can say more about the paper.
Speaking to people like Yasmine and some lawyers who've been active in this field, unfortunately, the culture of heralding source protection, heralding whistleblowers as a contribution to public good is not really what is happening. Mm-hmm. In many cases, whistleblowers are discredited, and I will dig deeper into that with Yasmine. But we certainly information to the public about malpractices. So, what are the key recommendations that you have written in your paper?
Well, when at the very end of the paper, and after doing the research, we recommend to promote or to strengthen first laws and practice that allows protecting the whistleblower's identity if they choose so, because in some situations, whistleblowers want to be on the record. Yeah. Second, promote and strengthen regulation, laws, and practice that allow journalists to keep confidential their sources of information. Third, we recommended to promote or to strengthen technologies that allow whistleblowers to file complaints without revealing their identity. And we included in our paper some examples. Publix is one example. Amy can talk more about the example in Indonesia. The other recommendation is that we recommend to promote and to strengthen organizations in different parts of the world specialized in giving legal and other support to whistleblowers before or after their statements. In this panel, Anna can talk more about that. We also recommended to promote and to strengthen journalist training to advise whistleblowers and to have a good relation with whistleblowers. We recommend to promote and to strengthen international standards that oblige states to adopt adequate legislation to advance incentives and avoid consequences for disclosure of whistleblowers. We also recommend to promote or to strengthen legislation that prevent and justifies lawsuits against a whistleblower for this statement. Anti-SLAPP legislation should also or have to also apply to whistleblowers. And finally, we recommended to promote or to strengthen and to increase, this is essential, the dialogue between journalism groups and whistleblowers defenders to understand better their roles, responsibilities, and way to strengthen democracy and the rule of law. Those are our humble recommendations.
Yes, so you can find actually anyone who's listening, and we will share this on Twitter and LinkedIn after the session, because the paper has just been published digitally. You can find it on unesdoc.unesco.org/arc, and the number is 48223. But as I said, we will share the link in Twitter and LinkedIn after the session. Now, okay, so we have findings, we have recommendations. Normally one would say, okay, we live in a perfect society, everything is all right. But that is why I requested humbly Yasmine Motarjemi to join this panel, because unfortunately the world is not a perfect place, as we all know, in many regards. Yasmine is a food safety expert and corporate whistleblower. Since 2000, when she joined Nestlé, the Swiss company, She noticed failures in food safety management of various nature that she tried to address in the context of her work. And on one occasion, she noticed that the quality manager of Nestlé was selling products that cause severe choking in infants. Of course, this is a food safety issue, and she reported it, objecting to this practice. But when the manager was promoted to the position of director of quality, it became actually the line manager of Yasmine in the head office. And he began to retaliate by harassing her. At the same time, he continued his malpractices and blocked her work. And as a result, some babies died from choking after consuming Nestlé products. So, very serious problem. Other negligence of the director of quality led to Nestlé's involvement in melamine-related incidents in the United States, China, and South Africa, 2007, 2008, as well as an E. coli outbreak with Nestlé cookie during the United States in cookie dough in the United States in 2009. So I'm just, you can find Yasmine all over LinkedIn and on Google describing some of these practices. She spent 4 years blowing the whistle internally. So it isn't as if she went out immediately. At all levels of Nestlé management, reported this in food safety and moral, and she was faced with moral harassment basically until she was fired in 2010. In 2011, she filed a lawsuit, blowing the whistle internally and externally, basically filed a lawsuit for moral harassment. In turn, she was the subject of strategic lawsuits of the company against her, but she won her case in 2020 against Nestlé, although the company still refuses to compensate her. And this just gives you a 10-year spree of what happens to people who are corporate whistleblowers, and this is not a unique example. In 2019, she won the European Parliament's Whistleblower and Journalist Award. I'm extremely honored to have her with us from Switzerland. Yasmine, welcome. Sorry for the long introduction, but I really felt it was necessary to paint a picture so that people cannot question the fact that you were morally right, legally right, honored, so that people cannot question in this conversation your veracity. So dear Yasmine, how are you? Do you have work? Have you been reinstated? What happened after the verdict in 2019? Oh, we can't hear you. Sorry.
Or maybe she's on mute.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, hello everybody, and thank you very much, Leon, for your invitation and introduction. Very good introduction. Well, I have survived a terrible experience, which goes beyond Nestlé. Actually, it also includes government regulatory agencies, a reaction of media and civil society. After 16 years of a struggle, which is still not finished because Nestlé is still refusing to correct its practices. And after all these years of hard work, service to society, I'm left shocked, traumatized, and worse, I have lost faith in our system of governance. After I was terminated, despite my expertise and 30 years of experience at that time and competencies, I could not reintegrate the professional world. My career ended there, and I have lived with no salary or with little income all these years. At the same time, I had to pay the cost of my legal battles, which included several courts.
Yeah. During your disclosure and after that, if I read well the story that you have published on the internet, which again we will share also, you were like open prey for journalists. So the experience you had with journalists was not productive. It seems to me that your story is a good story because we don't want infants to choke on food. How were you treated by journalists?
Well, I was treated fairly by some journalists, like the journalist from France Culture, who was, by the way, herself harassed by the food industry, but very poorly or badly by most media. Actually, I should say that most media ignored me. I have to make a parenthesis here. We are not talking about any subject. We are talking about food safety practices of the biggest company, one of the biggest companies in the world, which feed millions of consumers and also influence the regulatory policies in a wide range of areas, from food and nutrition, environment, labor, human rights, and others. So we are talking about a very important subject, yet most international media ignored me. And you have others who took action but treated me very badly. I'll give you some example, like New York Times, who engaged itself first and asked for my file, which I sent by DHL, then went silent without even explaining themselves. Another one, BBC, who recorded an interview, and then at the last stage, they just censored. They said their lawyers do not allow them to broadcast. Some others wrote an article like Bloomberg or Economist, but they give a negative spin to it. Some others defamed me. Some others called me a rebel, while it was my employer who violated the law. Another one, for instance, Le Monde, a journalist from Le Monde said, well, we will report on your case when you have won your court. But if you expect...
Did any of those, I mean, these are really mainstream media. Did any one of those give you a reason for example, not writing after reading your entire file? Or do you have any analysis on what happened?
No, they didn't give, that's the problem. They didn't give me any reasons. And I really wish that the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists look at why whistleblowers are treated like that, or I was treated like that. I don't know why. I don't know why. And that's the difficulty, because all the time I felt that perhaps I am dreaming and this has not happened, and perhaps something wrong with me. You see?
Yeah.
We are being ostracized by the media also. So not only you're ostracized and harassed internally, but also by the society.
Yeah, yeah. Now, all these things surely a company with the size of Nestle and the position of Nestle, following up on, you know, maybe they targeted you, but surely they must have learned something from this, or you don't think so?
No, I don't think they have learned anything. The reason being that, first of all, they still don't recognize that they have done anything wrong, and that is what is really frightening. Although the court recognized that I have been subject to harassment, the management was accomplice. The court recognized that they have made a fake investigation, that they have violated they had violated the law, and also that they did not follow up on my food safety concerns. In spite of this, they think that they have done nothing wrong, and they don't make a difference between the bad and good. And this is what is really frightening. And this is the reason why I continue to blow the whistle. And we already can see that because they haven't corrected anything, they got another incident in France just recently where dozens of children got sick with E. coli 157, and then two have possibly, two died, but possibly with Nestle products.
This happened recently, right?
That's recently in France, and this is under investigation.
Yeah.
So they don't see that anything wrong with this practice. Yeah. And this is what is frightening.
So we consume food every day, and surely it should be a super important domain for public interest journalism, but I rarely read about food safety, actually, to be honest. So yeah, that's really something to point at our fingers at the friends of the press. We should have more attention to this, right?
Certainly, not only on food safety, but there is a broad range of areas where media is not giving attention. One is food safety, but also judiciary system. One of the weaknesses of our system is the failures or corruption in judiciary system.
Yeah.
But the problem is not only that they don't pay attention to food safety. The problem is that who is now being criticized and the way the media is reporting. Because you see, even the food journals, the technical journalists specialized in food who can best appreciate what I'm saying or blowing the whistle on, did not write a word. And that was what was my shock was. No one cared to analyze what was my experience, and more importantly, what Nestle management said in court. Because you see, they came and said the most absurd things in court, but they were totally confident that no media will report. You see, we have to make a difference between freedom of speech, freedom of opinion of the media, versus their independence and impartiality. They may be free to write or free not to write. But to be impartial and independent is a different thing. But coming back to who is being criticized and how they report, you see, media is very free to write about presidents of political figures of even powerful countries. But when it comes to business leaders, you will see that they don't very often write about the wrongdoing of business leaders, only exceptionally when somebody is already on downhill. When it comes to reporting, well, they don't follow up and they don't make an in-depth analysis of the issues.
Yeah, looking at all the experience that you had in these 20 years basically, that you know, from the point on that you started it in Nestle up until now, what would be your recommendation for people who could be a whistleblower because they detect problems? What would be your advice to them?
Well, although I do not regret what I have done, I had to do it because it was my profession. But I will really caution other people against whistleblowing because, first of all, if they report internally, they risk to experience moral harassment, dismissal, and worse, to even get a bad reference. So even the issue will follow up all their career and they might not be able to find a job. I know many cases. Second, when they report to authorities, not always authorities follow up on their issue and they don't succeed the change that they want to see. If they report to the court for harassment, then the court procedure, particularly against a powerful company or organization, is very lengthy, is very costly. The process is very unfair. So they might not win. The outcome is very uncertain. But even if they win, you see, like in my case, there is no sanction for those who have violated the law and destroyed my life. Absolutely no sanction. Not only there was no sanction, but my boss, who was recognized by the court as a harasser, mobber, and was responsible for death of children, he has now elected as the mayor of his town. And then they cannot count on the media either. And even if the media now collaborate with them, what can they expect from the general public?
Yeah. Okay. But I mean, there's
news for most people.
Yeah. This is a very graphic picture of how things can go bad and badly wrong when people blow the whistle. we have a lot of guests. I will share everything on Yasmine and what Yasmine has written. It's really interesting for all journalists to dig into and to think to themselves, what can I learn from this? Let's move on to investigative journalism, because of course, still we need investigative journalism, and investigative journalists need sources. And luckily we have with us the director of CLIP, involved, who was personally involved in the Panama Paper investigations. I mentioned the Miroslava breach investigation. Maria Teresa Ronderos, you do a lot of cross-border investigations into financial malpractices. In your experience, how to protect whistleblowers must be super important in high-profile cases that you're working on. A very hearty welcome. I don't want to put you on the spot because I know that you do excellent work, but still, what Yasmine has just shared with us, how should, in your opinion, journalists do a better job in protecting whistleblowers, and how do you go about it?
Yes, I think that it's difficult for journalists to understand the new world. It's difficult to, especially for traditional media, they've always had problems adapting to the new world. They used to be like the mediators, the only ones with the voice, the only ones who would choose the agenda. And today, millions of people are out there making an agenda. And of course, whistleblowers are part of those people. They can blow the whistle, they can go out like Yasmine with their own conscience and really, really make a difference. And journalists get very uneasy with that in general. I do think that investigative journalism also needs to grapple with the idea that collaboration is the new ethics of journalism. Journalism will not survive and will not be trusted by society if it doesn't collaborate with those people who know best. People like Yasmine, who know much more about what goes on inside a food industry, or people like our colleagues in Mexico, who knew much more what happened to their colleague Miroslava Breach, who was assassinated by cartels in connection with political figures. So how do we understand that? So from CLIP, what we do is we collaborate. We want to collaborate with everybody. I wanted you to share this link of ours, which says "Nos faltas tú." We need you. We need you to work with us. So we are reaching out to ordinary people, to people who really have a lot of knowledge. Journalism cannot go on ignoring the knowledge in the room, the knowledge of our audience. They know.
So the link that you met, sorry to interrupt you, because I wanted to highlight the link, which is www.elclip.org/nos-faltas-2. Sorry, I interrupted you. I just wanted to highlight that.
No, I just wanted to.
So how do you then protect the people that are so relevant for the journalism?
So I think there is two things. One of the things is that the journalists need to make it technologically easy for somebody to leave you information, and if they don't even want to be not to leave a digital trace. So we've had a secure drop. As you know, Leo, Free Press Unlimited has been helping a lot of people, a lot of journalists like Mexico Leaks and many others. So how can people collaborate and leave information in a media outlet without being connected to or having problems in their own workplace or in their own atmosphere or whatever, or being even killed for sharing this kind of information? The other thing is collaboration. With Miroslava Breach story, the investigation was done by Mexican journalists, but they couldn't sign their story. They couldn't go out. They needed to be protected. In a way, they are journalists, but they needed to be protected, and their sources needed to be protected because they had very complicated sources. And so we as CLIP came out and together with another French organization, we protected them in the sense that we were the speakers for them. We were the ones who went out. And the
So
other,
as a foreign publication, so it wouldn't directly target journalists in Mexico. Is that
exactly.
the logic?
Yeah, we participated in the investigation, of course, but what we did was mostly protect them. And so CLIP has done that a lot with media that cannot talk to a source in a country. Then we go out and talk to the source so that this person is protected from the possibility of being like exposed or something like that. Now with sources, we need to be super careful. I cannot remark how much the protection of a source is not a matter of just the moment you publish. It's a matter forever. So I've seen journalists who did a story and then they published, you know, the room where they interviewed the source and all of that when they're telling the story about the great story they did. And then they expose everybody. They expose the source and they don't even realize it. And I've seen this from serious investigative journalists. So I think that the key is that the source needs protection all the time, not just a little bit. And in terms of the whistleblowing, I think what we need is more enlightenment. We don't understand that world. And the general, the general instinct of people is to shy away from people who rats, because that's the way they are being called, no? In our societies, in Latin America especially, people don't like, people who go out and tell, whatever inside story there is in their atmosphere. And we need to be enlightened. We need to have public discussions. We need to have more media about whistleblowing, more media that really understand the new ethics of journalism, because it's a completely new ethic and we don't understand it.
Okay. Now, you live in Colombia. Colombia is also a dangerous country. There's a protection mechanism for journalists to disclose malpractices similar to the protection mechanism in Mexico. There are some problems with it, but just out of curiosity, have you ever been targeted yourself? Do you live under a protection mechanism?
No, fortunately not. Fortunately not. I've been very close to people who have been targeted because I worked for many years at FLIP, at the Foundation for the Freedom of Expression, not as a member of the staff, but as a member of, a volunteer member of the board. And we saw many people targeted, and this protection mechanism has its problems, but it did protect a lot of people. Unfortunately, it does not protect sources. And I think that's a big problem in Colombia. And you see a lot of journalists sometimes unnecessarily exposing their sources. Sometimes sources are very humble people that don't realize the danger to themselves when they speak. And so journalists need to be aware of that. You don't expose a source who's not even aware of their own danger.
So that would be your recommendation, that we think deeper about sources, not just about protecting journalists, because a lot of these mechanisms seem to focus on it. Of course, we don't want journalists to be harmed, but definitely we need to do a better job on protecting sources.
And you know what, just to close, because this is the future of journalism. If journalism doesn't earn the trust of people will go out and do whatever they want to tell their stories and blow their whistles elsewhere. They don't need journalists to blow the whistle. They can go out and do it outside. So there's still...
Or they don't share anymore, which is also a risk, I think.
They don't trust that. So then you wonder why trust in media is falling, because people, you need to build a lot of trust to be able for whistleblowers to actually trust you. And that's the only way this has happened. And the other thing is that media need to be prepared technologically. So when the Süddeutsche Zeitung got all these bundles of information from which became then Panama Papers, it went out to ICIJ to help them process this amount of information. Now we have these humongous leaks. I worked in the last one, the Pandora leaks. And it was only possible because they had the technology, but also because there were 611 journalists working together. And none of us wanted to started to say, oh, but who's the source and why? And what we needed to do is go and fact check. And if Yasmine is blowing the whistle about something, that what you do is go and fact check and do the investigation, because and that's the difficult part, especially when you have very big, powerful companies.
So it is what you're saying. It is possible, but it needs a real heightened alertness and awareness about protecting sources, and it needs much more digital knowledge. Okay, thank you. Yeah, thank you for now. We're moving to, because of time. I mean, honestly, I think this is a discussion, as I said before to Eduardo, that's just starting, and we could be talking hours. But we have to move on because we have to close at the top of the hour. Eni Mulia, you're the co-founder and executive director of the Indonesian Association for Media Development, and you had this organization since its inception in 2006, and you were a journalist before. Now, in 2015, together with Indonesia's Investigative Journalists, you launched Indonesia's first network for investigative journalism, and in 2019, BPMN initiated the whistleblowing platform Indonesia Leaks together with other organizations. Eni, we already spoke to some extent about the digital threats to journalists and whistleblowers. Let's dig into the context a little bit, because what are the authorities actually doing to protect sources and whistleblowers? In Indonesia, there was a digital information transaction law passed. Has this law protected whistleblowers and sources, or what has it done?
Thank you, Leon. I feel honored and thanks to be in these distinguished panels and distinguished speakers. Well, we call informasi dan teknologi elektronik, or electronic information and transaction law in Indonesia. It is one of Indonesia's challenges for news sources protection and freedom of expressions and press freedom safeguarding, actually. This law has already persecuted more than 800 people since 2016 until now across the country. About 30% of them are the critical groups like journalists, activists, teachers, labor, and professors. 56% are ordinary citizens, and the rest are artists, writers, and literature. Most of these cases are defamation, actually 40% of them. And more than 80% of these cases are putting these people behind bars. I can give you some examples of these cases. Until 2020, 19 journalists across the country have been persecuted under this law because of their reports or investigations. In West Nusa Tenggara, a teacher receiving a sexual harassment threats by her supervisor has been persecuted. And in Aceh, a professor of a state university has to serve times in prison because he was criticizing the recruitment process of civil administration staff in his faculty in a chat of an internal campus WhatsApp group. So this is the law that we are facing now.
So the law actually targets sources. It targets people who complain about something. It's more, it's working in actually to put sources that disclose or talk about complaints actually behind bars. So what was the reason for enacting this law? Why did the Indonesian government do it? What was the purpose?
This law was first passed in 2008 and then revised in 2016. This electronic information and transaction law was supposed to protect people from digital and internet fraud, such as illegal credit card transaction, business or financial online fraud, and so on. But eventually, when it was passed by the parliament, there were also additional clauses about illegal contents. In Article 26, 27, and 28, there are clauses about contents related to defamation, blasphemy to religion, ethnicity, and social groups, and also threats. These articles then becomes very effective tools in controlling people's voices in the internet. They could be reported by just saying a complaint or report about bad public services or system. incompliance with business services, corruption indication, or any wrongdoings or injustice treatments.
So it becomes
People
like
then
a
becomes
weapon
afraid to
of the
speak
law.
up. Yes, it's like, targeting the wrong things.
Yeah.
So people are then afraid to speak up. They are afraid neither to speak in their social media nor to speak to media as news sources. There are some people who have been reported under this law because they talk to the media. So far I could remember one in Jakarta, an activist talking in a TV program about indication of a corruption case has been persecuted by this law. And another one, a mother in South Sulawesi, told reporters about the misconduct of the police when receiving her reports about a rape case against his daughter. Has also been persecuted by this law. Actually, who filed the libel suit under this law is the culprit himself.
So the effect of the law is that people are actually afraid to talk to journalists, and there's people are staying silent. Now, I know that you're an activist, so I'm sure that you try to do something about it. What is happening? Are you trying to plead with the government to change the law? Because obviously it wasn't the intention to harm sources. I mean, Indonesia has a certain record in terms of press freedom. It's not the worst place in the world.
Yeah, last year in February, our president Jokowi said that make a statement that if the ITE law does not serve the justice for the people, I will ask the legislative and together we have to revise it. It seems to be a good opportunity for us to revise this or even to abolish this law. So since then, the coalition initiative has been stronger to revise this law. The coalition consists of CSOs of freedom of expression, digital rights, legal aid organizations, legal reform organizations, academia, and this is also important that we gather the victims of this law together and also the media. Together we set up two things actually.
So you build a coalition, and one of the interesting things that I thought is the media are writing about this, which is not something that happens all the time. And that gives it more strength also. And the Association of Victims, of course.
Yeah, actually together we set up two things. One is the judicial review process to the Constitutional Court. And the second is to campaign for agenda setting and public opinion. This is through media, about the danger of ITE law and its impact for democracy. The media is playing very important role by reporting all of these cases and advocacy process. There is a microsite provided by Indonesian Network of Investigative Journalism where I work for. It calls semuabisakena.jaring.id. Semua bisa kena means anyone can get charged. So today may be them charged by ITE law, but tomorrow it could be you, your family or friends. This site basically is reporting about all ITE cases, data, statistic, new cases, and progress of advocacy. And also the most important thing is personal stories about the victim, how this charge have influenced their personal life. They're losing their jobs, less confidentiality, excluded by coworkers and family and friends, and eventually silence them in speaking up about the injustice or the wrongdoing they had received or had witnesses. In some cases, we believe this advocacy has started to show results. Two cases I mentioned before about the teacher in West Nusa Tenggara and then the professor in Aceh have been given amnesties by the president. Although they had to serve sometimes in prison, but they now are free.
So, just for time's sake, and I'm sorry because it's really a rich subject, you're involved in the Indonesia leaks also, and it's a method to guarantee anonymity to whistleblowers. Since it's created, did any of the sources that you've been working with in Indonesia League, have they been compromised or targeted?
Indonesia Leaks is a whistleblowing platform initiated in 2018 by 10 media organizations and 5 CSOs. Until now, we're still confident that we can protect the whistleblowers' identity because we work in 2 basic principles. One is collaborations between media and CSOs, and then the second is the protection of whistleblower. In protecting the whistleblower, we should use the anonymity principle as the first principle. We have to guarantee that the whistleblower identity will not be published, and the investigation is conducted by a special team of trained journalists in digital security. We also work with the community of cyber security to do a hacker test or penetration test to assess the platform vulnerability risk and then give the recommendation to the software maintenance to follow up our recommendation in increasing the system's protection. And also we working with a lawyer for whistleblower protection.
Okay. Well, that actually demonstrates also what Maria Teresa was saying already about collaborative journalism and the need for technological innovation in this domain. A change of the law would really fantastic result if that coalition building would lead to, which I actually think also is something that is not a normal thing for journalists to be engaged in advocacy to protect their sources. So that's very interesting, I think, in terms of a recommendation. We also have with us Anna Myers, founder of the Whistleblowing International Network. Anna, you've been active in the EU-based whistleblower directive, etc. But I wanted to really hear on a kind of an abstract level, because you've been working on public disclosure, freedom of expression, legal issues since as long as I know you, but probably a long time before. If you hear this, right? In 2014, you and I had a seminar together in the Netherlands. And it seems that, the same things are still on the table. What is how would you react before I go back to Eduardo and what would you say? What is the problem here? What is the real deeper problem here?
Well, I think the big problem is that the powers that be are working very, very hard to stop scrutiny. And they're doing it across the globe. They're doing it from different cultures and different backgrounds. But what we have is, on one hand, a willingness in some ways for governments to pass laws to protect whistleblowers. But at the same time, you have the laws that Annie is talking about that are coming through. We've had national security laws, so that when we've had the terrorism threats in the US and the kind of heightened concern about the protection of the public from terrorism, we had laws that went much farther than they needed to for the issues at stake. We've had trade secrets law and this is one that sort of, to me, encapsulates it in a really easy to understand way, that businesses and governments, of course, are doing or have been deregulating. Certainly in the West, since I've been in the field for 20 years, they've been deregulating. They've been also trying to allow more, market and trade, and so keeping that all liberal means that you protect the business confidentiality. And the Trade Secrets Act in the EU, the directive, really sort of woke up a few of the CSO communities that hadn't necessarily been working together, and which is why we came together around the EU directive. And just really quickly, it was basically a law that started to expand the notion of what companies could say was secret. You cannot tell me that Nike and Adidas have any real secrets anymore about their trainers, but and how they're made. But what they do want to keep secret is the way they market it, the way they sell it, and other aspects of their business, how they're structuring themselves. And they're calling that business know-how, and they're saying that's now a trade secret. And trade secrets used to be very much the innovative side of what you did instead of this kind of business know-how. And they were saying that companies could sue, and they were trying to make it criminal if you released that information. So they were expanding the notion of what they could say was confidential and proprietary. And then they were saying, don't worry, there's this clause that we can put in that will protect whistleblowers or journalists who have the gall or the, and the craziness, and if it's illegal, could raise something outside. And I've been working in the field of whistleblowing protection for 20 years, and that is not a fair deal. We've never wanted people to be the only way we stay safe. We do not want people like Yasmine taking on Nestle's on her own, which is what she had to do, what she's been doing. We want it as our backup for when all our other systems are working. And all of us are working in societies now that are like battling to hold on to this idea that the public's right to know is absolutely essential. And that to me is what the freedom of expression that we're talking about. And it's the public's right to know, even to the degree that the public sometimes doesn't want to know everything and doesn't seem to be interested all the time. But we inundate them with a lot of information, but we don't give them the bits that really matter about what's going on in their societies. And so to me, the sort of what's been happening is that as much as we've made progress, we've lost ground. And we keep losing ground under these new laws to protect the public. So as Ine was saying, that law was supposed to be about online fraud, and it's not protecting against that. It's going after what the powerful want to do, which is stop people from criticizing them. And that seems absolutely insane at a point that we've had a pandemic. We have, there are wars going on. We need to know what's going on. And we've also seen, I was talking to you very briefly, in the very beginning of the pandemic, doctors and nurses were going direct to the journalists. There was no sense that they had to, everyone wanted to know, everyone felt a threat. Within a couple of months, it started to shut down again. But for me, that was a complete, of course we want to know. Those are the examples where we say, of course we want to know. But if it gets filtered through so many layers that by the time the public gets it, they can say, really wasn't what she said it was, the person's crazy, the journalist has got the wrong end of the stick, by the way, we'll sue you if you publish, by the way, there's all these other laws that support our ability to protect that information, we've got a problem. So I think we're not starting in the same place, Leon, but there's certainly familiar refrains. I think the positive side for me is exactly what Eni and Maria Teresa was talking about, was collaboration. The collaboration between both journalists understanding that they collaborate amongst themselves, and that's pretty new too. Investigative journalists actually working together on the same story and sharing it across the world, partly to do with the fact that there's so much information and no one person can do it. And it's not just that they've lost all their ego, but the lawyers that I'm a part of that group, that they start to think they need to share and work in community for whistleblowers, and that we are starting to see the organizations that have specific remits all seeing whistleblowing, whether they're in human rights, anti-corruption, food safety, climate change, going, actually, we need this information. What we haven't got to is having, I think, a collective push against this idea that whistleblowers are individuals within organizations that have this loyalty and that have to run through a whole series, they're already in a difficult position and that they have to go through all these hurdles. And all whistleblowing protection laws do kind of start from this employment relationship individual, and sometimes that makes it very hard for journalists to get to the grip.
So what you're basically saying is that we're looking at this in the legal sense too much on an individual protection law, which are imperfectly implemented.
Yeah.
We need a kind of a collective protection. How would that look like?
Well, I want to
collective protection of the public interest, basically.
Well, if you look at it from a freedom of expression point of view, everyone has the right to freedom of expression. So workers have, and people within different relationships in which there's some power dynamic, and that's why you have whistleblower protection in particular, because someone in work is already in a relationship where somebody can control them and can take away their livelihood. Right, automatically. So you want those protections, but what you need to see that is they need special protection, not the public needs minimum protection and the employer needs maximum protection for doing their work, and there's these exceptions where they could go to authorities.
The balance is going in the wrong direction.
it has stayed pretty stagnant. It just hasn't been going more in the right direction. I think and so you can see even with the EU directive on the public disclosure bit, it's going to have to be tested. I want journalists alive to this because it needs to be tested the right way, not looking at it from the employment protection, but from the public's right to know point of view.
Anna, thank you so much. It's 10 o'clock. We managed to get all the contributions in. However, this is a discussion, and I think that what you're pointing at, Anna, and all the others, we need to do more on this field. I would encourage everyone to come with practices, ideas, recommendations. Eduardo, as you mentioned, you've published this paper. We will disclose everything, and we're looking really for a discussion. So we'll jointly set up some kind of a way of getting your contributions. Before you respond, we have Bex here, who is a cartoonist who's been doing a live cartoon to portray the session. And of course, we're super interested to have your contribution. Are you ready for sharing something with us, Bex, already? He's made several. Okay, come up here and show them. Eduardo, while Bex is coming here, tell me what you think.
Well, my first reaction, Leon, is that we had an excellent panel. After hearing, I mean, it's interesting because doing this paper, I interviewed many people, and after hearing the real whistleblowers and after hearing, the real problems, that, means to me that we need to work much more. We need to work not only on the legal aspect on protection, but on other aspects. And this is why I think that this panel was extraordinary. When Maria Teresa said, we need you. I mean, this is very compelling. We need you. We need you. We need your information, and we need to care you and to do good things. I mean, the idea of using technology, explain us how to use technology, and extraordinary, and closing in terms of, giving us a broader perspective that this it is a freedom of expression issue, but it is a public interest issue, and we need to put our efforts in protect people that are in some way risking their reputation, risking their work, even though there are legislation that pretends to protect them, but we need to work more. That is my conclusion.
Well, thank you. Just to share the picture, I'm not sure if camera can show this. So this is more or less where we started with Yasmine, which is that the press is really having a diminutive posture towards the big corporations and is not shouting enough. And then we had Amy and Maria Teresa talking about, we need to protect the freedom of work, and we shout a little bit more. And at the end of the session, we were basically saying, as the press, we need to do a better job. We need to climb up the ladder, do a better job on source protection, protect the kind of people that Yasmine, I can't thank you enough for sharing everything you did, but also thanking you for the ardent work that you do for the last 20 years, even if it sometimes seems an uphill battle. I know that everyone after this session will again herald you. So without further ado, we want this to be the start of a conversation. I want to thank my panelists very much for their contributions. We would have loved to dig into this longer, and I promise you that Eduardo and I will do the best to do that. One last round. Yasmine, final famous words. Sound.
No, she's muted.
Very good.
Yeah, go ahead. We can't hear you. I don't know why. Yasmine?
Yes. There is a quote from Algerian journalist. Right now I've forgotten his name, but it's in my paper, which is on LinkedIn and which you, Leon, will certainly share. And he says, if you keep silent, you die. If you speak, you die. So speak and die.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for everyone. And we have to close now. But as I said, thank you for attending. All the digital audience and the people in the room here, thank you very much for attending. Goodbye and good luck. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.